On Friday afternoon, while the Nancy Guthrie case was already back in the headlines because of a second note that reportedly claimed she had died after being taken, another message surfaced through TMZ. This one did not simply repeat the old ransom language. It did not offer a clear location, and it did not read like someone trying to quietly help investigators. Instead, the sender claimed there was a hidden phone somewhere and that the phone contained a short video of Nancy Guthrie with what he called the main guy on the day that was probably her last. He also claimed the phone contained pictures, names, ages, and addresses for 2 kidnappers. In exchange, he wanted 1 Bitcoin. That is why this new development is not just another strange message in a case that has already had too many strange messages. If the email is false, then someone is exploiting an 84-year-old missing woman and her family's grief for money. But if any part of it is true, then someone may be claiming access to evidence that could identify the people involved, explain what happened after Nancy left the safety of her home, and perhaps finally lead investigators to the answer her family has been begging for since February. Before we go further, subscribe and stay with this report, because this is not simply about 1 email or 1 cryptocurrency demand. This is about whether the newest claim in the Nancy Guthrie case is a hoax, a negotiation tactic, a witness trying to protect himself, or the first sign that someone close to the truth is beginning to break. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home in the Catalina foothills area near Tucson, Arizona, in the early hours of February 1, 2026. She was 84 years old, the mother of Today Show co-anchor Savannah Guthrie, and a woman whose age and health made the first hours of the case especially urgent. She was not someone investigators could assume had simply walked away and would return on her own. She relied on medication, had serious health concerns, and lived alone in a home that, until that night, should have been the safest place in her life. The evening before she vanished, Nancy had been with family. She was dropped off at her home, went inside, and from the outside there was no obvious sign that anything unusual was about to happen. That ordinary ending to the evening is part of what makes the case so unsettling. There was no public argument, no dramatic disappearance from a parking lot, no known struggle witnessed by neighbors in real time. There was a quiet home, an elderly woman returning after spending time with her family, and then a gap in the night that investigators have been trying to fill ever since. By the next day, Nancy was gone. Her belongings were still inside. The items a person would normally take if leaving voluntarily were not with her. The situation immediately looked wrong to her family, and the discovery of blood at the home changed the nature of the case. This was no longer only a missing person concern. It became a suspected abduction, and soon the public would see the image that has defined the case ever since. A masked figure outside Nancy's front door. The doorbell footage showed a person in dark clothing near the entrance of Nancy's home. The figure appeared to know where the camera was and seemed to interfere with its view. That footage has been watched, paused, enlarged, and debated across the country. People have studied the person's clothing, movements, body shape, posture, and the way they approached the home. But the footage, important as it is, did not answer the central question. It showed someone at the door. It did not show where Nancy was taken, who else may have been involved, or what happened after she disappeared. That is where the messages began to shape the case. In the days after Nancy vanished, ransom-style communications were reportedly sent to media outlets. Bitcoin was mentioned. Money was demanded. Deadlines were discussed. Later, a second note reportedly claimed Nancy had died shortly after she was taken and had been buried with nature. That phrase, if accurately reported, is one of the most painful and frustrating details in the entire case because it suggests a burial without giving a location. It gives the family fear without a place to search. It suggests knowledge without providing the one thing that could bring Nancy home. The public did not know everything about that second note for months. During that time, the family continued to plead for information. Investigators continued to process leads, and the case remained active but unresolved. When the contents of the second note became public, the emotional weight of the case changed again. Savannah Guthrie's public appeals carried a different kind of urgency because the country was no longer only hearing that Nancy was missing, it was hearing that someone had claimed she was dead. Then came the new email. According to reporting discussed in the latest coverage, the sender claimed to have access to a phone hidden in a secure place. He claimed that phone contained a short video of Nancy with the main person involved on what he described as probably her last day. He also claimed the phone contained identifying details for 2 kidnappers and offered to turn over the information in exchange for 1 Bitcoin. TMZ reported that it authenticated the new message as coming from the same person connected to previous communications, which is an important distinction. It does not prove the sender is truthful, but it means investigators cannot treat the message as if it came from a completely unrelated stranger without first testing it. That testing is where the case becomes complicated. In a high-profile missing person investigation, especially one involving a famous family, every public detail becomes material that a fraud can use. A person with no connection to the crime can read news articles, watch interviews, learn the timeline, copy the language of earlier reports, and create a message that sounds informed. This is why investigators do not simply ask whether a message sounds convincing. They ask whether it contains information that was not public and could only be known by someone connected to the crime, someone close to the victim, or someone with access to investigative details. That is why a claimed video matters more than another written statement. A written statement can be invented. A person can claim to know names, locations, or motives without proving anything. But a video, if real, can be tested. Investigators can examine the image, the background, the audio, the metadata, the device information, the file history, the lighting, the time indicators, and any trace showing whether it was original, edited, copied, or fabricated. The video itself may be only one piece of evidence, but the phone allegedly containing it could be far more valuable than the clip. A phone can hold a record of who recorded the video, when it was recorded, whether it was sent to someone else, whether the file was deleted and recovered, what networks the device connected to, and whether the person claiming access to it is the original holder or only a middleman. If the phone is real, investigators would not only want a password, they would want the device secured under proper chain of custody, isolated from remote access, and examined by digital forensic specialists before anyone had a chance to alter or destroy the data. That may explain why law enforcement would be cautious about any public negotiation. The sender is asking for Bitcoin, but a payment demand is not only a financial demand, it is also a digital lead. A Bitcoin wallet can be monitored. Its transaction history can be analyzed. Movement from that wallet can be tracked. If the funds ever touch a regulated exchange or a careless account, investigators may be able to identify the person behind it. Cryptocurrency can make a case more complicated, but it does not make a person invisible. The amount requested is also worth examining. Earlier ransom demands in the case were reportedly far larger. This new demand, 1 Bitcoin, is serious money, but it is not in the same category as a multi-million-dollar ransom. That makes the psychology of the email different. A demand for millions suggests someone trying to ransom a life or create the appearance of a large criminal operation. A demand for 1 Bitcoin sounds more like someone trying to sell access to evidence. That difference does not make the sender credible, but it changes the question investigators must ask. Is this person pretending to have evidence because the price is low enough to tempt a response? Or does he have partial access to something and is trying to profit before someone else reaches it?
There is another possibility that has to be considered carefully. The sender may not be one of the people who took Nancy. He may be someone adjacent to them, someone who was shown something, heard something, or came into possession of a device after the fact. If that is the case, the wording of the email becomes especially important. The phrase "main guy" suggests a hierarchy, but it does not explain how the sender knows that hierarchy exists. The phrase "probably her last" sounds informed and uncertain at the same time. Someone who witnessed Nancy's death would not need to say "probably." Someone who saw a video but did not know what happened afterward might. Someone inventing a claim based on public reports might use the word because it creates fear while avoiding a verifiable statement. That is why language matters in this case. Anonymous communications are not just messages. They are behavior captured in writing. Investigators can compare phrasing, spelling, grammar, rhythm, technical vocabulary, emotional tone, and repeated expressions across communications. They can look at whether the sender writes like someone trying to sound criminal, someone trying to sound remorseful, someone trying to sound detached, or someone trying to sound more informed than he really is. None of that replaces hard evidence, but it can help build a profile. The claim that there were two kidnappers is also important, but it has to be handled responsibly. It may sound like inside knowledge, yet it is not automatically proof. Many people following the case have already wondered whether more than one person had to be involved. Nancy was elderly and medically vulnerable. Removing her from a home in the middle of the night, controlling the scene, handling transportation, and later sending messages could have required more than one person. A viewer could reach that conclusion just by thinking through the logistics. So the real question is not whether the sender says there were two people. The real question is whether he can provide details about those two people that were not already available to the public. That is where a single proof image could matter. A screenshot from the alleged video might show Nancy's clothing, physical condition, location, surroundings, or a detail investigators have kept confidential. It might show a vehicle interior, a wall, a piece of furniture, a window, a landscape, or a reflection. It might show enough to prove the sender has access to something real without requiring investigators or the family to pay first. That is likely why TMZ reportedly asked for a screen grab. In a case flooded with claims, one verifiable image could separate a possible lead from another act of exploitation. But even a real image would not end the case by itself. Investigators would still need to authenticate it. In 2026, digital images and videos cannot be accepted at face value, especially in a case this public. AI manipulation, edited footage, recycled images, and staged material are all part of the modern investigative environment. A legitimate file would need technical analysis. Investigators would need to know where it came from, how it was created, whether it was altered, and whether it connects to the actual timeline of Nancy's disappearance. This is why the new email places law enforcement in a difficult position. Ignoring it publicly may look careless, especially to a family desperate for answers. Engaging with it publicly may reward a person who could be lying. Paying could encourage future hoaxes. Refusing to engage could risk losing access to real evidence. Moving too quickly could compromise a controlled investigation. Moving too slowly could allow a sender to disappear or destroy the evidence. That tension is made worse by the broader public disagreement over the ransom notes. In the interview you provided, a retired police sergeant discussing the case pointed out the conflict between the FBI and the Pima County Sheriff's Office over the credibility of the notes. He said the FBI appeared to be operating on the premise that earlier ransom notes were factual or authentic,
while the sheriff had expressed doubt. That disagreement matters because public unity is important in a case like this. When agencies send different signals, the public becomes uncertain, tipsters become confused, and the person behind the messages may gain more room to manipulate the situation.
The same interview also discussed details that could make a ransom note more credible, including references to items or conditions at Nancy's property that were not broadly known. Details such as a watch or a broken light, if accurately described and if not publicly available at the time, could suggest that the note writer had knowledge beyond what a random observer would know. That does not automatically prove the writer was the kidnapper, but it does explain why investigators would take the communications seriously. At the same time, the lack of proof of life remains a major issue. In kidnapping cases, proof of life can be critical because it shows the victim is alive at a specific time after the abduction and gives investigators something concrete to verify. In Nancy's case, the notes appear to have created pressure and confusion without giving the family what they needed most: clear proof that she was alive, or a location where she could be found. The new email continues that pattern. It claims to offer proof, but only behind a demand. That pattern is what makes the case feel so cruel. Every message seems to move the family closer to an answer while keeping the answer out of reach. A note says she is safe, then another reportedly says she is gone. A sender claims to know names but asks for Bitcoin. A phone is said to exist, but it is hidden. A video is claimed, but not shown. Each development creates hope and pain at the same time. For Savannah Guthrie and her family, this is not a public puzzle. It is a private nightmare being processed in public. Every time a new message surfaces, they are forced to imagine another version of what may have happened to Nancy. They have to wonder whether this is the lead that finally explains everything, or another person using their mother's disappearance for attention and money. That is a form of suffering that does not show up in court filings or police summaries, but it is central to understanding the human cost of this case. The public reaction to the case reflects that pain. Many viewers believe someone knows exactly what happened. Many are frustrated by the length of the investigation. Some focus on the doorbell footage and believe the person's body language, clothing, or movements should be recognizable. Others are angry at people who insert themselves into the case without helping. The strongest emotional theme is not curiosity. It is the demand for closure. People want Nancy found. They want the family to have an answer. They want whoever is responsible held accountable. That is why the new email has struck such a nerve. Still, frustration must not replace evidence. One danger in a case like this is that the public begins naming people, comparing faces, and building theories faster than facts can support them. That can damage innocent people and distract from the actual investigation. It can also help the real offender by flooding the public space with noise. A serious report has to keep the focus where it belongs, on what is confirmed, what is alleged, what remains unverified, and what investigators can test. The confirmed core is already serious enough. Nancy Guthrie disappeared from her home. Evidence at the scene suggested foul play. A masked person was captured near the home. Ransom-style communications became part of the case. A second note reportedly claimed she had died. Now a sender claims there is a hidden phone with video and identifying information for two kidnappers and wants Bitcoin in exchange. Those facts and claims do not need exaggeration. They need careful pressure. The biggest question is what investigators can verify from the new message. Can they confirm the sender is the same person connected to previous communications? Can they trace the email route? Can they compare the writing style to earlier notes? Can they identify or monitor the Bitcoin wallet? Can they obtain any proof image without payment? Can they determine whether the alleged phone exists? Can they protect the family from another false lead while still pursuing any chance the claim is real?
There is also the question of why the sender came forward now. The timing suggests the message may have been triggered by renewed coverage of the second note. That could mean the sender is reacting to pressure. It could mean he is trying to reinsert himself into the case after attention returned. It could mean he sees an opportunity. Or it could mean someone with knowledge has become nervous because the case is moving back into public focus. None of those possibilities can be assumed, but all of them are worth examining. If the sender is lying, the case still needs an answer about him, because grief profiteers do real damage. They consume investigative resources, mislead the public, and force families to relive trauma. They are not harmless just because they are not the original offender. A false claim in a case like this can waste time investigators do not have and create emotional injury that cannot be undone.
If the sender is telling the truth, then the situation is even more urgent. A real hidden phone could contain evidence that should have been turned over immediately. It could identify a person, show a location, reveal a vehicle, or establish whether Nancy was alive after she left the home. It could also expose a broader circle of people who knew something and stayed silent. In that scenario, the one Bitcoin demand is not only disturbing, it becomes a sign that someone placed a price on a family's only path to truth.
That is the moral center of this update. Whatever the sender is, he is not acting like a person simply trying to help. A person with real evidence in the disappearance of an elderly woman does not need to sell it through a media outlet. He can contact the FBI. He can use an attorney. He can ask for protection. He can provide proof without forcing the family to watch another negotiation unfold in public. The decision to demand payment before providing evidence tells us something about the sender's priorities, even if it does not tell us whether the information is real.
For investigators, the task now is to turn the sender's demand into an investigative trail. The email, the wallet, the language, the timing, the claimed phone, the requested payment, and any refusal to provide a proof image all become data points. The sender may believe he is controlling the situation, but every attempt to control it creates another record. People who communicate anonymously often think they are invisible. They rarely are as invisible as they believe. For the family, the only meaningful outcome is Nancy. The hidden phone, if real, matters because it may lead to her. The video, if real, matters because it may show what happened. The names, if real, matter because they may identify who is responsible. But all of it ultimately leads back to one question that has never changed since February. Where is Nancy Guthrie? That is what every message has failed to answer. The second note reportedly said she was buried with nature, but it did not give the place. The new email reportedly says there is a video and information about both kidnappers, but it does not publicly give the phone. The case keeps producing fragments instead of closure, and until one of those fragments leads to Nancy, her family remains trapped between hope and grief. That is why this email matters, even before it is proven. It matters because it shows how the case is still being shaped by people who communicate from the shadows. It matters because it may reveal a real digital trail. It matters because it may be another attempt to exploit the family. It matters because, in either scenario, someone is choosing not to simply do the right thing. The public should be careful. The public should not assume the email is real. The public should not accuse people without evidence. The public should not turn every detail into a certainty. But the public also should not look away, because attention is one of the few forms of pressure left in a case that has dragged on for months without a public arrest or recovery. Someone knows whether that phone exists. Someone knows whether the video is real.
Someone knows whether the sender is a fraud, a middleman, a witness, or something worse. And someone knows where Nancy Guthrie was taken after she disappeared from her home. That person may be watching the coverage. That person may be reading every headline. That person may be wondering whether the other person involved, if there was another person involved, is going to talk first. That is the pressure investigators need. Not reckless speculation, but focused pressure on the truth.
Because this case does not need another performance. It does not need another anonymous demand. It does not need another person trying to turn grief into currency. It needs evidence. It needs a location. It needs the truth spoken clearly enough that Nancy Guthrie's family can finally stop living inside a question.
The emailer says there is a phone. Investigators need to prove whether that is true. The emailer says there is video. Investigators need to prove whether it exists. The emailer says there were 2 kidnappers. Investigators need to prove whether that is knowledge or guesswork. And if the sender is lying, then he should be treated not as a harmless crank, but as someone who chose to exploit a missing woman and obstruct the search for answers.
But if the sender is telling the truth, then the most important question is not why he wants 1 Bitcoin. The most important question is what he has been waiting for, and why Nancy Guthrie's family had to suffer this long before he decided to speak.